This second roundtable is focused on communitary mobilization, potentials and challenges, and mobilization. I would like to invite our speakers to join us. How do you, how can CLT improve communitary mobilization? What were the main challenges and what strategies have been used to overcome it? What are the main strategies to engage community just so that each one of these experiences that were brought here in CLT and how do residents participate in community and in the land? I'm pretty sure that this debate will be awesome. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Jurema. I am a black woman. I'm wearing jeans pants, black shoes, yellow t-shirt reading Union, Union, Union. Just so that I can identify for those who possibly cannot see us, just so that you can make part of it. As I've mentioned, I'm Jurema, coordinator of a community cooperative. I would like to request Philip's help. May I sit in here? I'll get it started. Firstly, saying thank you to the whole team, CLT, that it's really helpful that Shangri-La is here to gather us during this activity. Union is, well, I won't be reading. How long do I have? 15 minutes? I do need 45. Let us move on. I will skip this part. I will skip UMP presentation. But I would like to say that popular housing is present in 17 federation states. Union is stronger in São Paulo City. As for others, are joining it just so that we can advance in public policies in Brazil. It is placed in 17 states. Here in the United States, it has over 20 years. We we've just had a meeting in Maranhão City where we had a national plenary in which three other states are gathering us. Because there is a whole process. It's just like a relationship. It's a slow one, but it's worth an investing. Even though it's tough, it's very good, just so that we can understand each other better. We also defensor of collective community and self-management. This is the first project. It's an honor to talk about it because I'm part of it. I live in this community which is known as Shangri-La. It's the first popular habitat housing in Rio de Janeiro, and it's a brand new process because as soon as we discover CLT and being part of it, we also looked for further information regarding collect community land trust because we had a legal guarantee. However, we noticed that that was the opposite. We had to be formalized, and we've been through this process for around 1.5 years. That's why I have asked the question for our Puerto Rico's partners on how it all worked. And we know we get to understand that it's something that takes time. It's not overnight, but it's worth investing. Currently, we are incorporated with 29 families. Bento Rubio Foundation that was first established in 96. We had resources And it's a joint effort work. So it's a different type of joint effort. It's not a party like joint effort. So we were based in Uruguay's joint effort. There are hours that will be worked, and this will be included in the house value. Shangri-La process started with a community inside of favela back in the 40s. There used to be a light contribution. I'm not sure if you're all the same age as I am, but the electricity bill. So there was something that was created in the Rio de Janeiro from a ESERS entity that which used to gather fundraising for the community. So back then, 16 families were living there, in which 9 were unemployed. So some of those families were hired, including me. And we invested and worked with, in order to, with slab, just so that we could start housing. Because we used to have a joint effort, but no funds. So we understood that housing was important in that area. However, we were also aware that we lack finances. So we thought about going to church and ask donations. Then we were offered the first raffle just so that we could like fundraise. And this first raffle, the winner gave the duck the prize back. So one for the second raffle, the person who got the prize, which was a duck, didn't want to give it back. They ate it. So you notice that in this presentation there will be many women, as 80% of the labor was done by women, single mothers, elderly lady who no longer had their children to look after them, and that's how we contributed, just so that those women would have housing. This is Shangri-La. These are the shekels that you can see. That was the best one. So these shacks was one of the best ones. And the last one that was destroyed. Then houses started being built in with those tiles you've seen previously. This is the construction almost at its final stage. Next. This is Shangri-La's corporation. And this is another corporation with 20 houses. It's known as Herbert de Souza. Citizenship. It happened with the citizenship activity. So it's the first, the second one in Jacarepaguá. There are 20 units. That was also helped by Bento Rubial's association, because back then it didn't used to exist, and even to these days there is a struggle to help those in need. So it happened from 99 until 2000. All of that was done with joint effort, with a huge amount of women. The first one was made out of wood, and this one out of iron, as the residents choose which one is better for them. But they decided to use iron, even though it gets rusty a year later. So everything is done jointly with the families, making sure we know what they want. And this is an emblematic land. It used to be bigger, where the owner sold one side as well as the other one, and then there was nothing but a narrow space in the middle. So this is from the land, especially from the west side. Really? Am I done with my first 5 minutes? So we were able to fit another 20 minutes, 48 square meters houses. This is Esperanza Group. As you can tell, it's a slightly different, but it was a challenging process. It's the only My House, My Life, a Brazilian housing program. So there was a another one that was worked nearby here. That was a challenge because it was in a tough land. But because we are poor, but we are clean. So we wanted that. We are clean and we built 70 houses within this Brazilian program, My House, My Life. Have you guys ever heard of lonely building? Lonely. Not lonely, it's solidarity. But we say lonely because it was the only one. So there was this joke. But this solidarity project helped us to sign a contract and migrate to the other program. So this is Esperanza project. This is the organization. I think it was shown in the video. 80% of the working contribution, the labor, was from women, as well as this land. As you can see, it's a difficult process. So working with management was difficult because we struggle with architecture, because architectures is the one who draws it, but we've got our voice, so we gotta tell them, although you draw that, we want something else. This is native, much younger. There's a group of women who are currently here. So there is there are women working together, and that's another project. So we call that Ipiriba Cooperative. Back then, we planned to have 37 houses. So you will always see Rubil's foundation, that it used to be the only one who would help us. Technical. So it's not assistance because I believe that assistance for those who fix our refrigerator.
Que faz assessoria lá.
This is not an easy place. It's far away. Access is difficult, but we accept the challenge. We're, at the moment, trying to take equipment to them. Here, you see photos of women working. This is another project. It's been around for 7 years. It's part of My House, My Life. And it's a very challenging situation over there. Here, Gamboa, this is a project close to the city of Samba. And this is where we are. Currently, the union is not supporting the project anymore. But as you can see, you have 116 families, you have this other entity providing technical consultancy. But this used to be a project of ours. This is what we envisioned for it. Here are group projects where we don't impose anything And on the last photo, you see what we call a web, where we weave these threads and someone has to untangle. So this is a way to show how some of our challenges are complicated. This is the Vito Giannati occupation. It is a building that belongs to the Social Security Institute of Brazil. So you see several flags here. There are 28 families that live there. And we have just found out that this building, which used to belong to the Social Security Institute, then belonged to Fiocruz, now has a third owner. I will conclude here, but I will be back.
Saludos, buenas tardes. Bárbara nuevamente del Caño Martín Peña en San Juan de Puerto Rico.
Good afternoon. We are going to speak about the role of community, the importance of community in the CLT, which originally, when it was created in the communities, was a government project. In Caño Martín's Peña, and arrived with communities already organized. And so there was an adaptation process because the original project of displacement had to be resignified. We had community struggles, and people got organized, they had assemblies. And after this process, the CLT was created. As the community wanted to avoid being displaced. So to be a part of the CLT, to be a member, to have dignity, humbleness, to be a family in struggle, committed to the development of our communities. We are happy remaining in our land where we have always lived and where we will continue to live. And we can motivate other communities to become a part of our struggle, to join us. We saw other examples. Ours is a reference. Our Puerto Rico story is a reference. In this photo, we can see a celebration of CLT members. There are over 200 of us. 151 deeds. And this isn't just for individuals. And we had several agreements for the use of empty plots where we were able to build housing. We made it possible for residents to make use of these plots of land temporarily. Here we have one of the community meetings. Related to the project, how it would be, the master plan of infrastructure and development, because the community has always been actively engaged in this process. No decision is made without community input. Here is one more decision-making process. You see people here discussing surface rights deeds, talking about the use of empty plots of land. And here we agreed on the temporary use of these locations. Here we have initiatives of education, which are an opportunity to update the community and educate them to defend what is ours. And the youth is always a part of these initiatives. Because, and including with community volunteer work, because a lot of the residents are elderly. And here we have community outreach, where young people can express themselves. We have done several activities and protests and art. There's art all across the communities, a number of artistic projects pertaining to housing rights. And everything that's done in the community needs to be decided collectively. We also engage in social activism. We have had to request the government for services. For example, we were without electricity for 2 weeks after a natural disaster, and we had no choice but to go to the streets, to take to the streets and protest. And here we have young people in a sports project to prevent violence and create youth leadership. And so several young people from communities joined these groups and initiatives. Here's another group, youth group. In one of the G8 meetings, these are young people that are members of the organization. And they walk together and help one another to become leaders in their communities. And finally, we have the resilience centers created in government schools. The schools were closed and became a part of the community because they are located within the district in development. And these are centers that are utilized in the case of natural disasters and in other events. Here we have community solidarity. This is a community struggle. Here's an example. In this photo, we see a space for exchange. It's what we're doing here today. And it's a place where we share our stories and experiences so that everyone can learn from one another, enhance their knowledge, and discover tools for tenure. Here we have great news. We secured funding for Caño de Peña work because sometimes when government authorities change, funding ends, but that wasn't the case. First, we had the removal of vegetation from the river. We had the building of bridges. And soon we will have a third initiative, which is the dredging. And after that, we identified locations where new housing units will be built for those who have been displaced. Here's an example of one of these buildings. These are resilient housing units, sustainable housing units. They have water tanks, and are resistant to natural disasters. We have had an increase in membership of the CLT. And we received funding, as I mentioned. And we had recognition. Here, this plaque says, "My home is secure with CLT."
When I first heard Jurema talking about the technicals, I recalled our beginnings. They wouldn't consider our experience, residents' experience, and that should not happen. Those who know the most the possible solutions are residents. Because professionals, they come and go. There are two leaders, community leaders. So I hope they can see how important their role is. Well, how does Fideicomiso contribute it? I believe that the more it develops, the better we'll be able to assist residents. One of the challenges, ongoing education. The more new people arrive, the more important it is for us to equip them. It is important to welcome them and also invite others, but we also must educate them, have community assemblies, meetings, present process. Sometimes it's impossible to bring a PowerPoint presentation in a certain community. However, we can bring posts in order to develop the sense of belonging. As they integrate this process, they develop this belonging sense. Thank you so much.
One. So I'll start by talking about the actions that happened before the CLT started, and then kind of what had happened kind of during our development, and then kind of where we are now. Since we are all over the city of Houston and not in one particular community, one of the big challenges is getting people engaged. And how do you engage community when there are so many of them, and they have different needs, and they are across a large city. Some homeowners are over an hour away from each other. So what does that look like? So in the very beginning of the CLT, as I mentioned before, there were communities that were aware that their neighborhoods would soon be prime real estate and they would ultimately be displaced. This is before Houston became unaffordable, but they knew, because Houston was now investing more in its downtown area. Years ago, there was a downtown, there were high-rise buildings, very centrally located, work center, but that's not where people lived. It's not where people hung out. People weren't going there to eat dinner. You literally would come down there to go to work, you would leave. And then Houston was committed to making downtown more of a viable place to live, work, and play. And so the neighborhoods that were surrounding downtown then began to get worried. And so it was they're organizing in small communities, and it wasn't a large group, but small community groups that were having these conversations. And I think that was one of the bigger challenges as well. There wasn't really a foundation for organizing in Houston. Houston is a pretty conservative, it's progressive in relation to Texas as a state, but for the most part, a bit of a conservative place. And so progressive movements are not something that people were really used to in Houston. And so how do you get large groups together to mobilize towards one goal was not something that a lot of people were aware of or even really knew how to do. And it wasn't something that was extremely popular. I moved to Houston from Chicago, Illinois, and in Chicago, Illinois is one of the birthplaces of community organizing. And so that's where I learned that's where I was trained as an organizer. So coming from a place where organizing is how you get everything done, or the only way you can get things done with a strong mayoral control, it was very different coming to Houston, where there is also very strong mayoral control, but the sense of organizing was not as ingrained, but the work was still being done. So I don't want to make it seem as though there was no work being done, but it was just very different in how people embrace the idea of progressive movements. And so the Community Land Trust, again, was able to convince city government to use that as a tool to address the affordable housing needs. And again, that was several neighborhoods coming to one particular person in the housing department who was desperate to try to find a actual long-term solution, because he realized that what was happening was not what was currently happening in the housing department for the city was not working when it came to affordability. So that's kind of how things, how the CLT was able to get started, through small groups coming together and kind of saying the same thing and the same messaging to a government official. However, then once you get the money and the funding to start a CLT, trying to convince everybody else that this is a way to address affordability. And in a lot of CLTs, we kind of did it backwards. A lot of times you get people on board and then you go ask for the money. We actually were able to convince government to give the money, and then we had to convince people that this was the way to go outside of those who were already interested in a CLT model. And so we had to go very much grassroots, and through organizing, going out. We were in front of grocery stores in the community, handing out flyers and talking to people. We were handing out flyers. We have what's called multi-service centers, which are community centers in different areas of the city that people can go for events and to learn more about things that are happening in their community. So we would leave flyers there. We were door knocking, very traditional grassroots tactics to just talk to people and say, hey, this is what's happening in your community. We didn't come straight to them and say, do you want to buy a house through the CLT? But really letting them know that the CLT model was available in their community and they should come learn more about it, because this is what's happening. And they could see around them that the housing that was being developed was not for them. And they would see it coming, and they wouldn't even think about looking into purchasing or seeing if it was for rent or anything, because they knew if it was brand new in their community, it wasn't for them. And so we were there to say, no, but it is. It can be. This is an option for you when they see the houses going up. And so once we did kind of the grassroots and got people to even know that this was a possibility, we started holding what we call community information sessions in those communities. So we would go after we've passed out all the flyers and talk to people at the grocery store and door knocking. We had a community organizer who was actually also a business owner in the community. She had been there for years and knew everybody. She knew all the pastors at the churches, and she was able to go and bring people to these meetings, and that's where we kind of started having the conversations about community land trust and permanent affordability, and why it would be beneficial to look at that model as a form of obtaining affordable housing. So that was kind of our next step, was going out and kind of using grassroots traditional community organizing methods, getting people in the room to then explain to them, there's this funding. Here's how you can benefit from said funding, and this is how you can protect and preserve your community. We made sure that we explained to them, while this was about maybe that one person being able to get housing, it was also about preserving the community, because they were very aware that family members of theirs had already been displaced. They had already seen the prices go up. They had already even thought about being forced to have to move because they could no longer afford their communities. So the issues that they saw were already there. So that's how we just connected what was happening to how the CLT could be a solution. And of course, people had questions, and they were saying, oh, you don't own the land. I don't even want to hear about this anymore. But when we started talking to people and asking them, what do you want in regards to housing, being able to resell it for a really high price was never at the top of people's answers. Once we started talking to them, they said, well, I want something I can afford. They said, I want a place for my kids to be able to play in the backyard. I want to host Christmas and Thanksgiving dinner. These are the things. I want a shorter commute to work. Those were the things that they were talking about. Nobody ever came and said, well, I want to be able to resell it and make a lot of money in 10 years. That wasn't the priority. I think people thought that's what you were supposed to do with your house, but when you really asked people what they wanted, having a stable, affordable, quality place to live for them and their family was always going to be a higher priority than just being able to make money off of it. So once people started realizing, oh, well, I can make this truly affordable, this is something that is attainable for me and my family, they were definitely more open. So then once we got people involved, with learning more about the CLT, then they wanted to actually buy through the CLT. And so then once you saw a couple of people buying, then people in the neighborhood start asking. Then we saw people having their family members come in. We have quite a few relatives that have bought through the CLT. So we had a daughter, and then she told her mom, and her mom came and bought through the CLT. We've had sisters and cousins that are related, and they're saying, hey, there is a chance for us to stay in our community. There is a way for us to obtain housing. Now, I will say, we had this funding from the city, and where organizing really played a major role in that was after the head of the housing department that was listening to the community and said, let's use the CLT, was fired under some very contentious situation between him and the mayor. The CLT was attached to him. He was the one that was pushing the CLT, so then the CLT became public enemy number one in the housing department. And they said, well, we're gonna go back, we wanna take some of your money back because y'all aren't moving fast enough. And y'all aren't putting people in homes fast enough, even though we were moving, out of all the housing programs, we were actually moving the fastest. And so we had $28 million removed from our program. And we had to shut our application down with hardly any warning. Another way that we would reach out and do outreach is realtors. Because people were buying homes, we would do the same information session we did for for the community, we would do it for realtors. And so then they were really happy about that, because at that point, prices started to rise and they were having to turn people away. People would come in. We require a home buyer education course. You have to fix your credit, all of these things in preparation for home ownership. And people would do all of that and be so excited, and then go out into the market and realize they couldn't afford anything. And realtors were saying, okay, well, these are the two options that you have out of the whole entire city. And so through the CLT, they were realizing that, hey, now I can go back and help the people I was unable to help. So they also became our advocates. So all the people that were in homes, their relatives, the realtor community, these now were all of our advocates and our supporters. Then, because you have to take a home buyer education course, that happens through a lot of housing advocacy and housing counseling organizations. So then they became our advocates, because they were sending homeowners or potential home buyers to our program. So now we have this big collective of people who were all working towards creating permanent affordability. So when the city decided to take our money, we showed up in droves. We had the highest attendance for a public comment on housing ever in the history of the city of Houston, because at that point we had built such a coalition of people invested in the CLT that, people were ready to come out and fight on our behalf. Now, we still had our money reduced, but that then led to other people being invested in the CLT and seeing how fragile funding can be for a nonprofit organization, and that got more people involved and willing to stand up and fight and organize around the idea of affordable housing and start having the conversations about how we can start using the CLT throughout other housing models, such as with Habitat for Humanity, which is an international housing organization, and how they then were utilizing the CLT too. So for us, it was all about building that from the beginning, the middle, and then afterwards, which we call stewardship. So after you become a homeowner, we don't just lift our hands. You are continuously being engaged because, again, we're all across the city. So we have different, I don't know if my slides are up there. No? Okay. I was going to show just a few slides of just some of the, it's fine, of the events that we have to keep the community engaged. So one, having workshops about property taxes and what that means, because some people don't understand how property taxes work, but if you do, then you'll go out and find ways to create policy with us when we're going to advocate to create better housing policy around taxes. Wills and estates and heirship. A lot of people, when we talk about title and families owning and not being able to keep their land because of issues with title. So we have workshops on that and how to understand why you should have things in place to be able to pass your home down to your heirs. And then we have just social events for people to come together and see how the CLT has grown from one family to now almost 200. So we have holiday parties. We do a family fun day in the spring because that's our way of bringing people together. That's our way of bringing people together that live an hour away at some points. So those are some of the things that we do. World CLT Day, our first, which is around this time every year, and our first World CLT Day, that community organizer that helped us at the very beginning, we went back as a team, some of the homeowners, the staff, the board, we went to paint and do a gardening project at her business that was in the community to give back to her what she gave to us to help us start the CLT. We do use a tripartite board model, so we have homeowners on our board as well as community members. And then our stewardship, so the stewardship also works with the CLT fees, answering tax questions and things like that, maintenance, and making sure that you're able to maintain your home and have resources. So that engagement continues, and it's not just engagement, it's also support to make sure that the CLT community is feeling supported in their homes once they're there. So it's, again, kind of a circle, because then they become the advocates for the program, and then the program then develops to create more homeowners, and the cycle continues on as we continue to grow. So right now, we're a membership organization with almost 200 homeowners and a plethora of housing partners across the city, along with our realtor community. Lenders and banks are now part of our fight as well. So you can engage corporate people in your fight. I know they sometimes don't do the right thing and we get a little nervous, but now some of them have become our biggest advocates as well. So when you're thinking about engaging the community, also think about the people that are gonna help you in different facets of that: donors, philanthropists, lenders, housing organizations, and expand your CLT community as big as you can and in different industries, because that's what had helped us when it was time to fight for our funding. And now we have that major support. So the next administration is going to get a couple of more hundred people at City Hall during those public meetings to get some more funding in the next administration. Thank you.
Sorry about the delay. So in terms of challenges in our community, I think what's becoming quite apparent to me is as we adapt the CLT model to suit our different communities and the kind of legislation we have to accommodate for, the challenges then change. So for us in the UK, we have local authorities that have a budget to build homes, what that looks like over the years has changed. In recent years, I say recent years, over the last decade or the last 15 years, there's been a shift away from social rents and more into home ownership, which I don't think accurately reflects what society at large in the UK needs. Because the majority of people are not earning enough to be able to save enough money to purchase a home. So they do require social rents. So then it falls on advocacy organizations to then build a case to convince politicians that we do need the funding to build homes, CLT homes. We have seen over the last 10 or 15 years increase in affordable homes, which are not affordable because they are at 80% of market value. Again, there's not enough, people are not earning enough even with joint household incomes, and this is where the CLT model comes into play. We look for publicly owned land, which is generally cheaper than privately owned land, otherwise we wouldn't be able to make it affordable. And then we look at the affordability and how much each home needs to be sold at. So then we have to find grant funding, which comes from the GLA, and then we have to look for investors, charitable institutes that are willing to invest. Then we build a case together with planning permission, with planning ideas, and then submit this in the hope that we will then acquire some funding. Before we do all of that, we have to find members of the community who are interested, and that's actually the easy part. Because we have an organisation in the UK called Citizens UK. It covers the whole of the UK and different social issues that we have in different towns and cities. There's different chapters. So in London, we have London Citizens, which covers the whole of London, and then it breaks down further into each borough. So where I live in the borough of Lambeth, we've got Lambeth Citizens. We have organisations that are members, such as church groups, schools, London CLT. And the idea is that each institution brings its membership along. So London CLT, we have about 4,000 paid members. So every time we sign something with London CLT, it's not that it's London CLT, it's these 4,000 members which London CLT is representing. Equally, when we have the South London Methodist Church Circuit, it's a series of churches that sign up their membership to these projects. So getting the people there is quite easy. But it's the work that we have to put in, which is about 18-month process to convince officials that we require this funding. With CLTs in London, it is in the grand scheme of things, it is quite new. But we do have an obsession with home ownership in the UK that sometimes can be a little bit unhealthy. So the properties that we build are on a lease model. So the lease lasts for about 125 years. Now, I don't personally know anyone that's lived for more than 125 years. So people then do struggle with the fact that this is a lease, I'm purchasing a lease, and at the end of it, that's it, it's expired. Then we have to pay another 50,000-60,000 pounds to extend the lease so that our children can inherit. So there is a lot of work that we've put in over the years, running workshops that are directly linked with each of our projects that allows the community to come together and really dissect each of the issues that the community is facing and how this CLT project can then accommodate for those needs. So it's not just about housing. It's a little bit more than that. Once the housing is secure and once those residents move in, what is happening thereafter? So on our St. Clement's site, where we charge ground rents, which should go to the freeholder, in this case is London CLT, we don't take the money to put into other projects. We allow that community to decide amongst themselves how that funding, I think the tune of about £50,000 a year, is then channeled and funneled into the local community so they can have youth projects. They can have services that perhaps help women and children services, homelessness and various other things. But the community is then, we have a handover process. It takes about a year after the property is built to build a residents management association where the people that are living in there run the place. So they have full control over the service charge, which is an issue in the UK. So if you've got a new build New builds generally have, to begin with, a low service charge. And then the management company or the freeholders can then decide, I'm going to increase the service charge by 300%. And you have no word of control over that. You have no control. You have to pay that. And often we are finding people are then becoming homeless because they can no longer afford to pay those service charges, which are intimately linked with the conditions of your mortgage. In the CLT model, we have control over that. It's a non-profit system. So they choose the management companies who manage the cleaning, the caretaking, the communal parts. So they have strict control over that. And once the series of workshops, there are 8 or 9 workshops that happen with the residents, as well as those politicians who were involved in the decision-making process for funding, so that they can see. Now, in that process, we've got different institutions that are involved. We've got the banks. One of our banks was going to pull the funding, but decided they wanted to have a conversation with us, and this was in the middle of the pandemic. And then they decided that the fact that they're not making a profit of it doesn't matter, because they will probably recuperate some of those costs in the continued banking through them, where residents are not only acquiring mortgages, they'll continue to bank through them. And there's a history that if I'm banking with a particular bank, I'm likely to open child accounts for my children, who then it creates a chain of customers there. You've got local politicians who we invite to our board meetings, who invite to all of our events, to celebrate our events. We invite them all to our workshops. We have current board members of London CLT who were part of the organising group, who have then become entitled to properties within CLT. So then it builds a chain of people, and people you've gone to asking for help, people you've supported in the process. And particularly for those residents who are lucky enough to qualify and acquire property, will tend to continue their membership and continue their services, volunteer services, which is essentially what we run on. We have a very small staff team. So once you overcome the freehold and leasehold issues, then it becomes a case of presenting to everybody how this is sustainable in the long term. But ultimately, it boils down to convincing our local politicians as to how we can or cannot deliver that. 5 years ago, when I first got involved in the project, I didn't know what it was. But if we go down to the middle of Brixton, when we run, occasionally we have to run this exercise where we have to get signatures on a piece of paper to demonstrate to the local authority we still need affordable housing and we still need CLT homes. We are increasingly finding that we don't have to explain to them what a CLT is, and more CLTs are popping up. We're appearing in the news. With our project in Lewisham, we won something called the Pineapple Awards for sustainable building. So all of these things build the reputation of CLT projects. And we also benefit from having the national CLT network that utilize social media, utilize their personal contacts to continue to do that. But I think ultimately, a theme that has run globally is what we call in the UK the cost of living crisis. So with energy prices increasing, with insecure homes, with insecure jobs, with people on what we call the gigs market that are on 0 hours contract that can have their jobs pulled from them at any given time, people are finding that they are stretched and squeezed into all manners of their life. So when they see an opportunity to give a bit of time, or even just spread word of mouth, or even put a signature to a piece of paper, they relate it to their own issues that they're having at the moment. And I think everyone has a stark realization that the system is really broken. And once they identify that you have managed to build in East London, you're building in South East London, we're looking at projects in on what you would probably call the suburbs, on the outer areas of London. Once all these institutions start talking to each other and hosting events, such as pre-elections when we have accountability assemblies with our local politicians, all these member institutes should manage to get together. And much like we're doing in this room today, learning from each other's experiences, taking it back to our own family, our friends, our institutions, that's how it spreads. It's almost like when you dip dye in water, you essentially see it trickling through. So that's the system that we're seeing at the moment. By and large, it is word of mouth. It's really difficult because funding in the UK is becoming scarce. So we rely on a lot of volunteer time, advocacy through our different institutions. And we find that if today I'm here on a CLT project, I might invite a couple of my friends from their refugees campaign or their social mobility campaign. We have a campaign currently running in London to end the discrimination against Afro hair. We'll have a couple of those representatives, because although their campaign is individual to them, at some point or another, we find all of our campaigns start at intersections. So we might find people who are running a campaign against discrimination for hair types also suffer discrimination in terms of jobs market, in terms of housing, and education. So together in those difficulties, we then come together and then build those numbers.
Thank you, all of you.